I'm not particularly fond of the video that I made yesterday. Not necessarily because I disagree with what's being said in it. Actually, I kind of agree with a lot of the things said in it. But rather, I think it's just very slow-paced and kind of struggles to explain its point. I mean, the point's made, but I was very tired. I was really tired. I've been really tired the past few days. So, I apologize for that. I'm appending the video to this video because I really like my outfit in it, and I do think there's some points made well. But I am going to preface it with that. I'm going to preface it with another few points as well. So after watching Samantha Lux's video in regards to Blaire White's video on J.K. Rowling's new book under the pen name Robert Galbraith, lots of names to this video, called Troubled Blood. I do feel that there's some flaws with Blaire White's position, and I'm questionable of how integral she is in what she's posing as far as it. But at the same time, as far as Samantha Lux's video, well, I think it has its point. It has a purpose of existing. I think that her point of view and what she's discussing in the video is purposeful. I also think that the book in the end is not particularly harmful in the context that we know that trans people are not all murderers. Like, are you expecting that some, white suburban household, because I know you're thinking white people, right? It's going to, I'm so tired. It's going to just be like, but you want to be like that murderer? You want to be like that murderer? Oh, Clark, he's going to become a murderer of women. How am I going to live with my son? I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. Like, I get the outrage. I get that, like, no, a trans woman is not equivalent to, like, some man who gets a kick out of, like, dressing, all feminine and kind of mocking women as he does it, but at the same time, like, I know a lot of trans women who will express that they've experienced autogynephilia. Like, it's basically the state of experiencing euphoria in a sensual way of one's gender presentation and gender identity. When you just feel free, when you feel pretty, oh so pretty, I feel pretty and gay. That is basically autogynephilia in a nutshell. And men and women can both experience it. But when it's a man experiencing it or a male experiencing it, it's thought of as like, why are you doing that? But at the same time, it's a male experiencing it, so at the same time, like, one side is like, this is just someone who is experiencing the mode of femaleness. But this other time, on the other hand, I'm going to keep speaking so fast to compensate for my tiredness. On the other hand, this is a male experiencing femaleness, so they're also male. So that's going to have consequentiality to whatever they're experiencing and however it has, manifestation in the reality. One thing that people have not given enough credit for, as far as Arielle Scarcella, is that she basically came up with this tetrad of ways that womanhood can be experienced. And basically the initials of it are M, P, E, and S. Mentally, physically, emotionally, and socially. And I think that if you're not going to acknowledge that 3/4 of that, or 1/4 of that, or 2/4 of that are all have different consequences as far as the reality of one's womanhood, of a person's womanhood, then you're missing out on a lot of color. It's a lot more complex than that. And I think that the right and the left get that wrong. I think that the left think that if you experience womanhood mentally, then you're a woman, hun. And the right thinks that if you're not a woman from the get-go, or a woman who is functionally so, then who the hell are you, So, on that note, I think that I'm going to talk a little more and then go to the video. And as for Joe Rogan and Abigail Shrier, who I mentioned actually first in the video, the thing with them is, I mentioned something about how FTM transition has skyrocketed in terms of frequency in the past 5 to 10 years. And I think actually it's come to a par with male to female transitioning, which I think is also somewhat increased. So there is something of, questioning for that, because it might not necessarily be a problem, but it could also be a problem, because is it natural for it to express itself in that rate of occurrence? I don't know, because I think that there is a biological basis for why a male to female transition might be more common than a female to male transition, but there could also be one for the other way around. So I don't know. But the truth is that, it has gone up a lot. And one could argue that you don't necessarily have to transition if you feel slightly uncomfortable with your gender. It's a question of, it's a question of utility. It's a question of comfort. It's a question of efficiency. All these things have to be considered. It's not just like I'm trans, We're so identitarian about things that it's a binary question at this point of like, are you trans or not? Rather than a complex, set of variables and concerns and values of concerns and prioritizations, that might yield a different answer than what is expected of the current narrative or current consensus or current liberal consensus or current conservative consensus. I mean, there's a reason why someone like Renee Richards, prominent trans tennis player in the 70s, basically said this. She said it's better to be a perfect man than an imperfect woman, so to speak. Not that there is a perfect woman or perfect man, but at the same time, it's like, if you have a functional reproductive system and your body naturally develops into that of a man or a woman, why not regale in that? If you can. If you can't, then that's another question. But if you can figure it out, or, find a way, or just find love or something, or find meaning in life beyond just your gender or your apparent gender, or find something, then there's a question of that. And I'm saying this as someone who has transitioned. I'm saying this as someone who felt like there was a lot distressing me and confusing me, and that led to a very oppressive existence. I couldn't really live with myself properly until I transitioned, in many ways at least. So it's a really complex set of questions you have to ask yourself if you're going to transition. And if you're detransitioning, that's perhaps just as complex a choice that is based on really deep personal truths and concerns. And one has to grapple with that at any point regarding their gender or questioning of gender. But as far as trans people in sports, Abigail Shrier actually brought up an interesting point that sports has always been about bodies, not about identities. And I saw actually this Piers Morgan or Good Morning Britain panel segment where one of the panelists said that, it seems like we always ask gender to preside over sex nowadays, at least as far as the liberal sort of, I always say liberal, but it is liberal, let's face it. The sort of school of thinking that is expected of us nowadays. We don't always in practice, but in expectation, we basically ask gender to preside over sex, which, how does that work all the time? It doesn't always work, because femaleness juxtaposed with a male identity and maleness juxtaposed with a female identity is not the same as maleness juxtaposed with a male identity and femaleness juxtaposed with a female identity. It just isn't the same phenomenon. It's akin to it, but it's not the same. And I think that needs to be acknowledged. I mentioned that in my first videos about J.K. Rowling, that, there's still some maleness to me as I scratch my facsimile of a beard. And, that ought to be embraced in juxtaposition with your womanhood, not to be erased as I was always a woman, I am a woman, I always will be a woman, all that stuff. Because let's face it, it's simple, but also not that simple. And lastly, I make a point about basically intersexual biology. Basically, the concept of like people who don't fall easily into male or female based on their biology alone. And I have some friends who are like that, who are intersexual, and some who are just androgynous. And it's kind of a hard ball there because generally speaking, you will fall into one or the other, and people like that are relatively uncommon. And even at that, they're likely identifiable as one or the other, you know. And even if they can be mistaken as one or the other as well, there is generally a sort of tendency of them being understood as one or the other that manifests. It's very rarely going to be half and half or whatnot, or just ambiguous, you know. So that was basically what I was getting at. That maleness and femaleness are sort of extruding poles that interlope with each other. And I don't think you can erase that. I don't think you can just choose at a whim how you're perceived. At least somewhat. You can choose your presentation, you can choose to transition, and you can choose to identify a certain way, but at the same time, people perceive you as their eyes tell, and as their ears tell, and as their hearts tell. So you have to acknowledge that, and you have to be brave alongside that. So without further ado, I think I'm going to start the much slower spoken video that I recorded yesterday. Here goes. Okay, so it's been about 2 weeks since I posted a vlog, so I'm going to try to figure that out. This is a channel for insightful thinking and music, so mainly about, some political topics, some controversial topics, and some anecdotes from my own personal life. Just a place for me to vent, just a place for me to, discuss what's on my mind and what's on the cultural consciousness mind as I see it, and kind of just go with that. So one thing actually that came to mind, or that came to my presence, was this topic of Joe Rogan discussing trans people. I think it has to do with this podcast they did with Abigail Shrier, in regards to her book that had to do with the uptick in, female to male transitioning. The book itself kind of has a strongly handed title, Irreversible Damage, the Transgender Craze Inducing Our Daughters, the Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, right? And it's very provocative. A lot of trans people are not happy about it. Arielle, Scarcella, is on board with the book. In fact, I remember when she was discussing that very podcast that Joe Rogan did with her, and she basically emphasized that, well, in short, I can't recall fully, but in short, she emphasized that the book itself is not transphobic and that she herself is not transphobic. And based on the podcast, what I watched a good hour and a half of it, of its 2.5 hours, near 3 hours. She is very compassionate and is not transphobic. She's just concerned that a lot of people, a lot of girls namely, are entranced by the idea of being men and are being seduced by this trend into transitioning in higher rates than ever seen before. I mean, it's a well-known fact that before, well, in trans circles at least, that before about 2015, most transitioners were male to female transitioners, like me. The uptick in female to male transitioners came in the mid-2010s, when in England alone they had rates of sorry, my mom called. She actually had a surgery today on her eye, her left eye, and she's recovering really well. It's not really a recovery at this point even. She kind of just has, a new retina, basically. But yeah, she had a cataract, so now she's recovering. But yeah, they had rates of like dozen-fold, tenfold. I want to say 40-fold, actually, like 4,000%. Like it's a really absurd rate of growth, even if it were tenfold, absurd rate of growth, to the extent that females, now it's normal to know that females transition more than males. So there are more female to male transsexuals or female to male transitioners than there are male to female ones. And I'm very careful with my terminology in this video, I suppose, because I feel like if I use the word transsexual, it'll be taken as, some sort of antiquated school of thinking. But if I use males or men and women just in the unambiguous syntax, it'll become ambiguous and perhaps contentious, because it's a contentious topic. In the podcast, a lot of emphasis was placed on trans athletes. Joe Rogan himself is like, this MMA guy, so like, it's an important topic to him. It's his main locus of professionality. And he's concerned, understandably, because masculinization yields a much more robust frame than feminization does. If you've masculinized and then feminized, it's very different from feminizing and just staying that way. Someone who's undergone male puberty will have likely a much larger frame, much more muscle, larger bone mass. We all know this. And we know the story of, say, Fallon Fox, who transitioned at age 30 and became an MMA fighter. And I actually didn't know that this, but they claimed that, but Joe claimed on his podcast that these girls did not know that she was trans when she was in the ring with her, when they were in the ring with her. And long story short, as far as that, a lot of girls got sucker punched, knocked out, even concussed, real damage that could have been permanent. Granted, it's MMA fighting, so like, what do you expect, right? But at the same time, there are things to protect people from that. That's why you have different weight classes. I wouldn't want, say, let's bring it to basketball. I wouldn't want, say, Chris Paul and Shaquille O'Neal to be in the ring with each other. If they were to wrestle, that would be kind of a bad idea, So it makes sense to note that, like, for instance, I'm 5'8". I'm trans female. So because I'm taken as female, because I am female, because I'm outwardly female, all of these three things, I'm generally regarded as somewhat tall. As a man, though, 5'8" is a rather short height. More men are taller than you than not. Somewhat more, at least. But in the class of women, the vast majority of women are actually shorter than me. A short man. And I'm sorry if I'm slipping up a bit in my words today. I just ate, and before that I was napping, and I'm a full-time college student, as well as someone who is trying to construct an EP, and someone who's writing a memoir, and who meets with a mentor every Thursday, which today is. A lot of things are on my plate, so I'm a bit winded, I suppose. It's understandable. It's okay. Another news story, actually, in relation to this, is once again J.K. Rowling, who I've made 2 videos about at this point. She released a book under her pen name, Robert Galbraith, and it has to do with basically the psycho plot. Basically, a man dressing as a woman to kill and maim other women. Kill, rape, and maim other women, I should say. I should know better. This happened last time. A little bit of excitement for us. Walk this way! Walk this way! Walk this way! He just keeps barking. He just keeps doing it. Doesn't stop. Is he even a boy? I don't know. I'm sorry. I didn't know. So, in short about J.K. Rowling, I have no idea if it's Rowling or Rowling. I really don't. The author of Harry Potter and her new book under her pen name, Robert Galbraith. How do you even pronounce that? Like, this shit is conceivable. So, like, is it inherently offensive? You know? Like, I'm kind of interested in the topic, you know? This doesn't have to be like, oh, all trans women are cross-dressers out plotting to kill women. That's not the point. And I mentioned this in the last videos regarding her, that anyone who is male can theoretically transition or adopt feminine traits or feminine, you know, aspects of presentation and claim that for themselves. It doesn't erase their maleness, though. And you know what, honestly, something like that, like violence against women, it doesn't have to be sexed in the way that it is. Though it probably will be, because, of course, it happens more often, you know, as men against women, not as women against women or non-binary people against women. Honestly, though, all of this, I'm really tired. I'm really tired by it. Because at the end of the day, who is it really hurting? You know, I have tried my best to make of myself, well, not even tried, really. I'm just lucky. I've been blessed to be able to actually live as a woman. You know, not everyone can. And to expect that people ought to allow themselves to be imposed on of who you are. I just can't get by that. It does not make moral or principle sense to me. Now, granted, I'm speaking generally. I do think that with non-binary people, there is a question, because it's very rare and in some ways conceptually sort of a magic unicorn or magic Pokemon to have someone who's perfectly androgynous, as though that would fit non-binary. And you know what, on top of that, as far as, say, liberalism and conservatism, I'm not sure where I'd sit. I think that I've had a fancying for conservative ideology in the past 2 years. But at the same time, to fully adopt it would be sort of suggesting that I'd prefer to experience life as though I were still a man, not a descendant of the West in purity. You know, things like that. You know, that someone who is a friend of mine, if she gets into some sort of trouble, she can't abort her child. Which, granted, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think abortion is a tragedy. I think it's a tragedy that one should be able to endure. You know, it's just, it shouldn't happen under ideal circumstances. It's not something that is desired, like, ever. But anyway, things like this, the non-binary, transgender, all trans women are women, all trans men are men, as though that means anything less than a superposition of ideology onto a relatively simple statement. It makes you think. It makes me think. You know, at the end of the day, in some ways, you know what? In some ways I am a man. You know? It's just at the same time, to what extent am I? You know? Now, admittedly, I can't serve up a child from my womb. I don't have a womb. But at the same time, people who fancy me are probably not attracted particularly to men over women. And truthfully, I wonder who those people are. Please come to my door. Please. No, there are a few, but they're mostly guys. It's, you know what? Why are we trying to normalize the freakish? Yeah. Why are we trying to normalize the abnormal? Normalize the atypical? Normalize the unusual, the unorthodox? Why? You know, and once we reverse the paradigms, are we going to be happy then? Like, it's just a new paradigm. It's no less freeing. It's no more freeing than the other one. You know, and the other difference is the other one is more attuned to nature. Okay, it's not natural for a woman to have a penis. It doesn't really happen unless someone undergoes hormonal transition, which was not a thing before the 1930s. So, what do you say about that? Now, granted, there are some who have a relatively feminine form, or even a female form. Not a female form. Fairly feminine form, and might have one. You know, and they might not have even transitioned. That does happen fairly often in trans circles. Namely, if you go to Asia, you'll find a lot of that. But like a woman, like, it's just, that itself is very rare. And you get me? It's not something that is conducive to nature. Now, granted, I could be making an appeal to nature, but of course I am. Nature is important in these topics, especially when we're talking about freedom to be. If you're trying to ideologically convert people into seeing you as valid, you probably have some sort of fragility to you. And that's just not cool. You have to figure out where your freak flag I swear I seem drunk and I'm not. You have to be okay with where your freak flag flies. Because otherwise, you're just stepping on people. You know? Like some, mainly online, like, they can be so preppy. In other words, they can be so arrogant, pretentious. Pretentious is the word. about being something that's really cool and hard to really simplify. You know, why would you want to simplify that as though it's just another thing? Allow wonderment to take people, you know. There are actually a lot of people who'd be really interested in being with a trans person, but if you see that as a threat, if you see that as people simply, you know, claiming you as some sort of phenomenal object, then you lose out on the fun. But at the end of the day, there are so many different ways to look at things, and each one has its place. There's a place for gender essentialism, and there's a place for gender radicalism. You know, they concord with different things, you know, because in the end, we're all masculine and feminine, and we shouldn't be shamed into little boxes. But at the same time, like, you're not gonna get like some half uterus, half testes thing that generates you into some unique being that transcends male and female. It's not going to happen. So with that, you have to kind of make do with what you have and what you are, which we're all having to do. So I have respect for both of them. I think that it's just that I don't like how one is taking precedence, so much so that many girls are deciding to transition into men. And there's a growing community online, on YouTube, on Reddit, of these girls who are expressing their regret of transition. And there's also a disdain I have for the, you know, ideological monolith that's been created as far as gender politics. So I think that's what I have to say about that. Sprinkler just sprinkled on me. That's fine. It's not my leg. It was mild. After watching that video, I was just like, I'm tired, you know? It was tiring to watch for me, because like I was just speaking so slowly. But I mean, the topics are tiring, and we keep discussing the same stuff in circles. Like, we have to be able to move somewhere, you know? Yes, there are people who will have their own ways to move one way, and others will move another way, but there has to be some net force that we can agree on, at least. Or at least accept. Because we're kind of lost in the weeds right now. That's what I think. That's why I kind of appealed to the idea that there are different schools of thought that are useful at different times at the end of the video. It is what it is. I am what I am.